When our final presenter was 12, she helped found the Spirit Bear Youth Coalition, 6 million strong, advocating for what became the Great Bear Rainforest. As a young woman, she reported from Cairo, Baghdad, Beirut for the CBC and Reuters. She followed the campaign of Barack Obama and even had an office at the White House. But her deep belief in the power of art, expression, connection, and culture has led her in new directions, and she just might be on the verge of changing the world. Finally, after 6 years of trying, we are thrilled to present a treasure of Vancouver. Please welcome Salimah Ebrahim.
And I also want to say, doesn't it sort of feel like an exhale to be in a room with our phones on silent, even just for an hour and a half? I'm sure as many of you can relate to the anxiety that I feel these days when I'm looking at my home screen with the news like startling and humbling being served up every minute or every hour. It feels sometimes, especially this past year, these past months, that we are constantly inhaling. But as you and I know, the story we are being told of a world turning away from each other or turning even against each other, that story is at best incomplete. We know this to be true from the everyday acts of neighborliness in our communities, from the stories that we've heard here tonight. And all of those acts, when added up, form a stronger current than any of the headlines of the day. And because they speak to the primal need that we all have for human connection. Acts like those I witnessed just a few days ago when I joined a mezzo-soprano and a baritone in pushing a piano onto a pirate ship, just so they could set sail and stage a pop-up opera for a group of 40 strangers. Or the acts of a group of poets that I recently encountered in a Toronto living room, who invited as many people as that space could hold and staged a poetry orchestra, beckoning the creative impulses of their guests. Or even the ballet dancers, some of the best in the world, who dance on the largest stages in the world, that have over the last year taken single backyards, energized by the experiment of place and story, and danced on dewy grass in front of an audience, many of whom had never seen live ballet before. To the acts of hundreds of strangers who have opened up their living rooms for the first time to other strangers, and to the cellos and to the violins of those strangers, and in the doing became strangers no more. Telling you about these offerings, these intimate experiences between artists and hosts and audiences in everyday spaces that I have witnessed over the last year while building Artery, could easily fill up my entire 7 minutes, because they are powerful reminders that arts and culture remain one of the few areas in society where people can come together and share an experience, even if they see the world in radically different ways. And this idea in our climate today, where we are more siloed, it feels like, than ever, between our social media streams and other media streams, and in when it feels as hard as it ever has to get beyond our cultural bubbles. This idea that we don't have to agree about an experience, but as the artist Olafur Ellison says, that we still consider it worth sharing an experience at all, is so important. But to be clear, this idea that our living rooms, that our rooftops, that our backyards can be stages for intimate cultural connection, the central idea on which Artery is based is not a new one. In fact, it's a very old one. For most of history, in fact, art and culture has taken place in homes. From Mozart playing in living rooms to the Harlem rent parties of the 1920s. There is nothing like seeing a performance in the intimacy of someone's home. But what makes this moment compelling, however, is that for so long, these performances, when they weren't limited to hosts like the Medicis, were limited to the creative communities in which they existed, making them hard to discover and hard to access. But today, there are some ground shifts, I would venture, that are changing all of that and making this revolution, or some might say counter-revolution, possible. In fact, if you can do me a favor and raise your hand if you have ever done any of the following: donated to a Kickstarter, ridden in a stranger's car, used any type of ride-sharing service, couch surfed or stayed in an Airbnb, or even let a stranger off the internet stay in your home. That last idea in particular would have been unthinkable, crazy even if you think about it, 6 or 7 years ago. But today, more than 100 million people have stayed in Airbnbs. The fact that any of these interactions seem even remotely normal should give us all pause and a sense of the speed at which our norms, mine and yours, surrounding our space and our values are changing. We are realizing the power of technology to unlock existing idle assets, and most importantly, perhaps, build trust between strangers. But culture, of course, is not a transaction. It's not like calling up a car or booking accommodation. In fact, that's why I think so many of the traditional venues in which creative communities currently interact, the bars, the performance venues, the festivals, are under so much strain. They require the traditional marketplace middlemen to bring together performers and audiences, bookers, promoters, managers, agents. The cost of these venues then are subsidized largely by alcohol sales or charity, which bypass the performers and often standardize the cultural experience. Meanwhile, I would venture, our private spaces have been vastly underused, and the consequences of that has been to turn us into passive cultural consumers. Culture has become produced over here, and we are often and only invited to connect with it and its creators across an orchestra pit. This is where I think culture can honestly come to the sharing economy, by offering a space for trusted connection, for more co-created experiences, and for greater agency in the cultural life of our cities. And just like the kernel of this idea isn't new, these intimate connections between performers and spaces and audiences are happening every day, everywhere, through tens of thousands of informal house concerts, DIY spaces, Salon series, and creative gatherings. But our idea is that by connecting them in a community, in a platform, we can allow for greater access and discovery, and in the doing, hopefully inspire even more artists, hosts, and audiences to connect with each other. So I just want to quickly let you know practically the way that Artery works. Artists and hosts have profiles, and artists can add an idea for a pop-up performance, and hosts, regular people that want to open their homes for about an hour or two, can find someone and offer to collaborate. Once both sides agree to the details, the showcase goes live, and anyone can claim a spot and receive the exact location. That means that a cellist on one side of town can see a host with a rooftop on another side of town, and they can get in touch, and they can decide on, say, 15 spots, $15, and launch that showcase. Any of us then can open up Artery and see that there is cello on a rooftop nearby, grab the spots, and find ourselves a few hours later sitting with 14 other new friends, experiencing an intimate performance that otherwise might never have happened. And since one of the first showcases happened in my living room last year, hundreds have followed, and thousands more of peer-to-peer connections are happening every day. Just to give you like a sense of an Artery showcase, they're not parties, they are cultural experiences that often last 60 to 90 minutes. And this was actually an opera in my living room. It started in my bathroom. I'll tell you that story later. This is a great performance. We've had poets taking over laundromats, really rethinking and imagining spaces. It's a great series called Dirty Laundry if you're ever in Toronto. And again, musical theater and on rooftops. And just all sorts of different artists and connection and audiences connecting together. And they have all been uniquely local and intimate co-creations, taking on the character and the vibe of the host and the performer. And the attendees themselves represent a remarkable, diverse community, cutting across occupation, ethnicity, income levels, just like art is supposed to. They are surfacing culture in places not always expected to surface culture. The creative life of a city that is often invisible, and thereby challenging our idea of where art gets to happen, who gets to fund it, who supports it, and how we as a society access it. And just to say, these hosts don't operate as commercial venues. They're just opening their homes for a single evening for a few hours at a volume that makes sense to them in their space. And so far, 1 million square feet of space has been offered by hosts on the platform. Just think about that for a second. During a limited pilot, 1 million square feet of new community and cultural space has been unlocked in a city, 1 living room and 1 backyard at a time. It makes me think about what else is possible for our cities and our towns and neighborhoods all over the world as we lean deeper into these trust networks. We started piloting in Toronto and have since expanded to New York, but because this is a platform, showcases are popping up now in Iceland and Spain and Edinburgh and Austin and Boston and Washington, D.C. We've had invite requests from people in over 30 countries, including a host in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, who wants to play a role in surfacing the creative life of that country. The idea of these local artery communities connecting with each other globally, from Beirut to Vancouver to Brooklyn, really gets me going. What might that look like, I wonder? What happens when, through trusted connections, strangers turn into neighbors? When we can see new life and reimagine existing spaces? When we can support artists and the potential to offer moments of connection to each other, even for an hour or two, is fully realized? When people who might never have found themselves in a room together start routinely finding themselves in a room together. When it is easier to move beyond our cultural bubbles. What else might be possible? Thank you so much.